Okay, in the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Saint Vincent Ferrer, Saint Jude, Lady Victory, Lady Sorrows, Lady Apparitions, Congregations. Now, where's the stick go? Oh, yeah. I see with the point somebody erased yesterday. Always very helpful people around here. But in any case, so today the Roe versus Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court. What? And so in any case, there could be a little chink in the armor. Now it's interesting, the Roe versus Wade, I don't think it'll have any effect on the actual abortions. But nonetheless, it's still symbolically, obviously, very important. And I think a sign of the chink in the armor of the devil's kingdom, even though practically it should have very little effect. But nonetheless, we're continuing here. I guess unfortunately I wasn't able to prepare I wanted to have a whole vision of all these kind of little diagrams and slides to show a picture of where we are in the resistance. But first, got to see where we are in the big battlefield. Remember the fifth age of the church, the one that got erased. Right? So we're in the fifth age of the church, from 1517, Martin Luther. This is the age of the great apostasy. Seven letters of the seven churches, and that takes us to the chastisements. Great monarch, a brief age of glory, and then of course the coming of the decline and the coming of the Antichrist. And then the seventh age, which is Judgment Day. So I think remember in the big picture, don't forget, whereas it's easy when you're in the trees, they say you can't see the forest because of the trees. When you're right next to a tree, you could be next to 2 trees, 3 trees, and you might be in a huge forest. But because you're next to a tree, you can't see. You have to step back to see, oh, that's just a small clump of trees. No, that's a great forest. And so sometimes we might remember we're in a great forest. We can't see the forest because of the trees. So remember, the 7 days of the church match the 6 days of creation. So God created everything. The first day, light and avoid earth and darkness. Separation of the waters on the second day. Dry land on the third day. Sun, moon, and stars on the fourth day. That's the age of light and glory, the central age. Fishes and birds, the 5th day. Animals, and last of all, man, the 6th day. And rest, the 7th day. 7th day of the Old Testament's Holy Saturday, Christ rests in the tomb. The 6th day was the age between the Maccabees, where they brought about a great reform in the church of the Jews. It was a temporary reform, but it did reform the Jews. And then another collapse in the coming of Christ. And the 5th age was kind of broken by the period of the Maccabees. But it's really a continuous downfall from the time of the Babylonian captivity to the arrival of Christ. And the essential theological element of these last 500 years between the Babylonian captivity and Christ is that the Jews stopped doing idolatry, with the exception of the brief period with the Maccabees. So in the brief period of the Maccabees, they did idolatry. Before that, the idolatry diminished. And after that, idolatry disappeared. But what happened during this 500 period, there was no more worshiping of false gods, but their view of Christ changed. Because in Daniel the prophet, made a prophecy concerning the 70 weeks of years. So he gave a date that there will be 70 weeks of years, that's 490 years, 70 times 7, between the rebuilding of the temple that was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 596 BC. In 596, during the middle of the 70 years, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple of Jerusalem. Daniel prophesied it would be rebuilt in the time of Esdras, and after it was rebuilt, there would be 70 weeks of years. And then the Messiah would come, and the victim and the sacrifice would fail. As a result, Bishop Emerson used to point out, the devil changed his tactics against the Jews. Before this period, he was getting them to leave Israel and to worship false gods, worship Baal, and worship all manner of false gods. But he realized in this last period, he didn't need them to worship false gods. He needed them to change their view of the true God, because the true God is coming. So that when the true God would come, they would reject him. And so it was a 500-year preparation. There were two sides to that preparation. God is preparing for the coming of Jesus Christ to redeem us from our sins. And Satan was preparing for the coming of Christ so that when he would come, the people would deny him. Hence, the Pharisees rose up around 500 BC, and they were originally good. Then the changing, all these experts on prophecy arose. And then the being better Jews than immoral Jews. So the good moral Jews were better than the immoral Jews. And the Pharisees became leaders of that group. And then there were liberal Jews and conservative Jews. So before they were either Jews or they worshiped false gods. But now you've got liberal Jews and conservative Jews. The liberal Jews like the Sadducees, the conservative Jews like the Pharisees. And then they changed their view about the Christ. And they went through the prophecies of the Old Testament, of which there are many concerning Christ, and they changed their views about Jesus Christ. So there was a great dispute when he would come. He'll be the King of peace, and he will reign forever, and he's going to have a dominion over the Romans. There's going to be a physical reign and physical dominion, and and that there'll be oppression will be removed, and then is going to take away sins and be visited for our offenses. So each of the prophecies about Christ, Satan worked on corrupting them, so that when Christ came, the vast majority of Jews rejected him. And now that's the age of the Jews. Come forward to the age of the Gentiles. The last 500 years, from 1517 to 2000, these years are very similar to about 600 BC to the coming of Christ. And in this period also, there is a change of the view of Christ. So the ancient heresies have come forward. But in the old days, the Arians, the Nestorians, they all formed their own churches. They broke away and formed their own heretical branches, and they condemned all the other heretics. In modern times, there has been heretics mixed amongst all the various branches, so that there are Protestant Catholics, and these were called the Jansenists a few hundred years ago. And the Jansenists have two sides. There is the conservative Jansenists, and then there's the liberal. And most Protestants are liberal, but the conservative Jansenist. And the Jansenists change the focus from what matters is teaching, not teaching about Christ, but the morals about Christ. And they developed a new thing 500 years ago in the beginning of the Great Apostasy called the Devotio Moderna. The greatest book of the Devotio Moderna is the Imitation of Christ, or the modern devotion. And there was a recognition that there was a corruption at the end of the Middle Ages to where the Catholics became too much thinking and not enough action, and too much doctrine and not enough practice. So in order to fight against that, the Devotio Moderna came up and says, what does it matter if you believe all the doctrines, but you don't live them? That's how it began. over the last 500 years, we've now reached the point where I was speaking with a Dominican priest in 2013, a Dominican from Avrier, one of our resistance priests. And he said, it really doesn't matter whether you're a sedevacantist and believe the Pope is the Pope or you don't. As long as the families are living good moral lives and their children are, saying their prayers and they're being moral. It doesn't matter. And that was the teaching of the Devotio Moderna. When you go back before that, to the time of St. Athanasius, St. Athanasius mentions it 3 times in his creed. Without doubt, the only way to be saved is to believe the Catholic doctrine in its entirety. And who does not believe that doctrine in its entirety, without doubt, he shall perish eternally. That's how St. Athanasius begins. Don't forget, when he writes that creed in 325 AD, it was great immorality throughout the world. It was a time of great upheaval because now all of a sudden Catholics had freedom. They were all persecuted. Now for 10 years they've had freedom. And when you go from imprisonment to freedom, it's party time. And so there was a lot of corruption that came up very quickly. And so a lot of bishops said, we've got to stop the moral corruption first. Athanasius says, no, the moral corruption you will always have to fight. There's always going to be bad faithful, bad bishops, bad priests, and of course sometimes a bad pope because you only have one pope at one time. But you must stop the heresy first. This is the focus of the church during these first 4 ages. Get rid of the heresy first, hold the doctrine, and let the doctrine do its work of purifying the behavior of souls. Now, in the last 500 years, we have, first of all, the problem within the Catholic Church of the anti-Thomistic movement that St. Thomas was too cerebral, and we got to get to the Devotio Moderna of Thomas à Kempis and the, Imitation of Christ. And it's interesting, Thomas Kempis was never canonized. When he was, and one practical reason was when he died, he didn't die. Thomas Kempis, they thought he was dead. He was in a coma, and they buried him. When they dug up his body to the process of canonization, they found the top of the coffin was scratched almost to the surface, so that he had woken up alive and very strong in the coffin after he was buried. And he scratched and scratched and scratched, and then he died in the coffin. And they stopped the process of canonization of Thomas à Kempis, but they wouldn't have found that out if they didn't dig up his body. But his the Imitation of Christ, we recommend the book very often. It's got very, very spiritual sayings in it. But these spiritual sayings, the problem, the negative side of these spiritual sayings is that the spiritual began to take precedence over the doctrine. And this became very important. It's an essential part of the preparation for Vatican II. Because when Vatican II comes, you've got to remember the devil has a 2-pronged approach. One is he is going to get heresy into the mind of the people. And he is going to destroy the morals of our society. But the second is, he knows there's going to be a reaction against Vatican II. And the reaction is going to be very dangerous. Because if the reaction is like the reaction that came before, there'll be new St. Robert Bellarmines, there'll be new St. Thomas Aquinas, there'll be new St. Dominics and St. Francis's, there'll be new St. Benedicts, and he doesn't want that. He wants there to be a different kind, the devil wants there to be a different kind of reformer than what we had before. These must be moral reformers. Protestant movements have had moral reformers many times. In fact, the Jews had moral reformers as they had so much corruption, and Islam also moral reformers. So very many false religions, seeing their people become very morally corrupt, brought in a moral reform within their religion to keep their religion alive. The Catholic Church is different, however, because the Catholic Church never brings back just a moral reform. It always brings back the reform of the doctrine. And then the morals follow afterwards. And they follow from the doctrine. So part of the preparation of Vatican II from the Satan's perspective, on the one side, he's preparing the liberal movement of the Modernists. And these were primarily present in the scriptural department and in the higher academics throughout the 19th century and the early 20th century. They were condemned throughout the 19th century, but they weren't fired. So Leo XIII condemned them, but he didn't expel them. And Pius IX condemned them, but he didn't expel them. St. Pius X condemned them, and he chopped off heads. That was the difference between St. Pius X. But by that time, there were too many heads to chop off. And he could not chop off very many of the heads that he wished to chop off. And so the modernist movement was simply slowed down and not stopped. And now we come forward to Vatican II, and the modernism doctrine is there, ecumenism, religious liberty, and we've got to get along with all the religions. This is all a preparation for the coming of the Antichrist. Remember, the great apostasy has a specific destination. St. Pius X describes it in Pascendi in 1907. He says, modernism is not a heresy against the Catholic religion. It's against all religion. Modernism is not only anti-Catholic, it's anti-every religion. And it's important to understand that, because we're now at the point where not only does the Catholic religion has to cease, but all the false religions must also cease. So the Protestants have to cease, the Hindus have to cease, the Muslims have to stop. All the false religions must also be brought to an end. Now this does a very beautiful thing from Satan's planning perspective. Since all religions are being attacked, what does he want us to do? Get together and unite. As the great, what's his name in Minnesota? Michael Matt says, unite the clans. Can't get the Scottish clans to unite. So unite the clans. And when we unite the clans, we can defeat the enemy. In fact, this is all part of a long-term battle plan. Part of Satan's plan is to unite the clans. That's part of the plan. We have to pull together all religions. The way to do that is to try to kill all religions. When I try to, all of you hate each other, but if I got a machine gun and try to shoot you, for at least 5 minutes, you're going to become buddies. During those 5 minutes, you're going to be united in order to fight against me. So that's like in the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie, where the Muslim guy is trying to kill Harrison Ford, and then he tells the German soldiers, shoot them both, and so they work together, teamwork, and blow the other guy away. That's called love. But what happened after they blew the other guy away? They went into the business of killing each other. But this time it's going to be different. This time is different. What's going to happen is the devil is trying to get the clans to unite because we have a common enemy. Paul VI, now Pope Francis. We unite against a common enemy, the pro-abortion movement. And the purpose is not only to fight against a straw man, because abortion isn't the problem. Pope Francis isn't the problem. It's false religion, it's heresy, it's Satan that's the problem. So when we put them together, then this group, this time, are going to be kept together, not torn apart. We're at the point now where it's a time to pull things together. Bishop Sheen pointed this out in the 1940s. He said the time of ripping things apart is over. We're now in the time of pulling man together. We're in a new religious age. This religious age is going to culminate in the most religious man, who is the most manly of all men, who will reveal man to man and redeem man with man. And that man is called the Antichrist. We are preparing for that. We've got to remember that our battle of the resistance, the battle against Vatican II, the battle against Roe v. Wade, all these battles are the same battle. And the battle consists of, we're going to pull the people apart, and we're going to form a controlled resistance, a controlled attack. The controlled attack will then become the chief soldiers of Satan. The principal soldiers are not going to be the Rothschilds and their buddies. The principal soldiers are going to be the conservatives and the good guys. They are going to be the main soldiers to make sure that the Antichrist rules. They're going to be the main soldiers who will destroy the Catholic faith and the values of Christianity. They're the main ones. And so in order to prepare them, you have to create a problem. Then they're going to fight against the problem. Then you're going to provide the solution. Only the solution is the next step in the revolution. We're simply living out the continuation of the dialectics of Hegel and of communism. The thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Right. So you've got the thesis, then there's going to be created an antithesis, an antithesis. They're going to fight each other, and they're going to come together with a synthesis. This synthesis is going to be a new thesis. And so you got brick, and you got another brick, and then there's going to be an antithesis, and then another synthesis. And what you're doing is you're building the wall, building the structure of the kingdom of Satan. It's an organized structure. So remember, so where we are in the fight, you don't want to get lost in the trees by not being able to see the forest that we're dealing with. So in any case, Vatican II comes. So Vatican II comes, and we got the heresies of Vatican II, and that the continuation of these heresies, well, make ecumenism, religious liberty, and collegiality. The bishops can decide what to do with the Pope. All this comes forward from 1962 or 1965, the end of the council, to 1988 is one stage of this battle. And from 1965 to 88, you've got one stage of the battle. Unfortunately, you don't have this thing, that's okay. I'll just put it, this is my attempt now. This is called the live operation here. Minus the live part. Because the challenge is that unfortunately wasn't able to do all the crises of the last few months. Where's that little button? Yeah, good. Yeah. And just stop it right below, right? Maybe yesterday. Okay. Just want to see the outline, that's all. Just to see the outline. Let the criminals in. Get those criminals in here. There's Mrs. DeLoca. Don't go grab the criminals. Send them in. What? Okay. So then, yeah, you can turn off the lights. Anyway, I'm just asking you the Cambrera is lighting on the light board. On the board, it's kind of hard to see, so I've got to just type them, and maybe they can kill the lights. It might. Oh, you can still see it, right? It's fine. But anyway, so the first part, the destruction of Latin Mass, faith illegal. That's a phase. It's a phase of any revolution. It's a normal phase of a revolution. No Muslims. Okay. Yeah, that's probably better. Is that better for you? Yeah, okay. Okay. So anyway, so the destruction of the Latin Mass, faith illegal, that's just a phase of the overall revolution, right? And then, but a very important part of revolution is, first part is the destruction phase, the demolition, the violence phase. But then after, because you've got to get rid of the old order and replace it with a new order. In that phase, you make everything traditional, everything true, illegal. But you recognize that many, many people are not going to go along with it. It's just a necessary phase. Also, those that do go along with it aren't really going to like it, the majority of them. But that's okay. Give them time and they'll get used to it. And so that phase is very important. But that's all preparation for the very important phase of phase 2, which is the toleration of a resistance. And every revolution does this. As I say that and that's so that in this stage, you're going to attack the original guys because they went too far. They went too far. They were bad guys. They went too far. So in this stage, you're going to tolerate some kind of resistance. And that the first resistance, so in 88 was very important. So if we have here the things that happened, see if I can get, one of them is the, you got the 1984 indult. Okay. Let's try this. I just feel it. No. Okay. I can feel that number 94 indult, right? And that says that 94 indult was very important. And remember the 84 indult is very similar to 2021, right? So the indult of 84, the rules of it are all part of a preparation. And that is that you can have Latin Mass legal. If, except all Vatican II, right? And then you normally had to put it in writing. You had to put in writing that you accept Vatican II. And so that this was but note that this thing was so strict that the indult was followed almost nowhere, right? It was followed almost nowhere. And one of the places it was followed was here in Louisville, Kentucky. St. Martin's Church, very beautiful church. On the east end of Louisville. It is a very beautiful church. It's got 2 full-size bodies of martyrs, child martyrs, saints in the side altars. And it's a nice church. They keep it open 24 hours. They have a guard there. And they have the Latin Mass there since about 1984. So it's almost 40 years of the Latin Mass there. It was the original indult. And very few places in the world actually accepted it. There's so many rules and regulations. Very few accepted it. But it was the beginning. And then preparation for 1988. The key of 1988, the essential of 1988 is that in 88, you have the, what do you call it? The consecrations, right? In 1988, see, I can feel the others, but I can't see this one. That was a little bit early. These numbers, you can't see them anyway. We'll pick a number here. All right. Yeah, so that 1988, you got the consecrations, right? So you got the consecrations in 88 and the Ecclesia Dei, right? One thing to remember is that, the consecrations and Ecclesia Dei, right? Right? And that this is, and remember that, because many people have been going to Latin Mass the last few years, don't realize that between 1969, 1970 New Mass, until 88, the only way to have a Latin Mass was to be illegal and unapproved. and thrown out of the diocese and thrown out. So during that period, there were Latin Masses preserved throughout the world. One of the places is right here. This is one of the founding places of tradition in the history of the Latin Mass battle. 1969, 1970, Father Hannafin never said the new Mass. 1973, they moved out to this property. We were the continual Mass and Blessed Sacrament on this property since 1973. And then the chapel goes back to 1969. And then they moved here in 1973. And that the fact is that there are chapels like this everywhere in the world. Most of them are closed or moved to other places. But we didn't know that there was a global movement. And many of us throughout the world had no idea that there was a global movement against the new Mass. But we knew that we weren't going to accept it. We weren't going to accept the errors and heresies of Vatican II, and we were going to stay Catholic. We knew that. We didn't know anybody else was. We didn't know about the rest of the world. We just weren't going to change. And so a small group formed out here in the woods here in Kentucky, in this little chapel there. And that chapels like this were everywhere in the world. Very few of them are still standing from their beginning. This is one of them. But remember that had the priests like Father Hannafin and Father Urban, the priests here, plus many priests who passed by here. I met over 100 priests coming through here in the 1970s and 80s when I was a kid, coming to visit Father Hannafin and talk about why they should stay with the Latin Mass and stay with tradition. And then Archbishop Lefebvre sent people over here. He sent some ladies to start convents. He sent guys to start monasteries. They're always starting to start something. And then he sent people over here to learn the Latin Mass. Archbishop Lefebvre sent multiple people over here in the 80s, since 83. And then, including one of them was his sister, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre's sister, Mother Marie Christiane, the Carmelite. She came and visited here to establish a Carmel in the United States. And in all in the mid-80s. And so then we had priest retreat for the SSPX here. And it was all part of a general movement of tradition that we're not going to go along with the Modernists. And this was just one of many, many places like this throughout the world. And so when they would visit here, then they'd go visit other places as well. And this place just happens to still be allowed by Our Lady to still be standing after, it'll be 50 years in next year. So 50 years, it was 49 years we've been here now. It's the 50th year now, the 50th year of being here. And that, but this since the whole Vatican II crisis. Now these illegal people were essential to the preservation of the faith during this period. And so Father Hannafin, Father John Quinn in Chicago, of so many priests, Father Stanley Waslick in Chicago, a whole bunch of other priests, Father Aidan Doherty. I don't remember all their names anymore, but so many, at least several hundred priests in the United States alone. And then there were priests in France and priests all over Europe, and also priests, especially Europe and the United States, and some in South America. And then we spread from here to the other places. And that the priests are saying, we will not tolerate this new Mass, it's wrong. Now, during that period between 1970 and 1988, tradition grew. Tradition became stronger. And so, therefore, it was time for the Modernists to answer tradition. And that was the purpose of the Ecclesia Dei Commission in July of 1988. And it's written in the document by John Paul II. He says, there has been a schism, which of course is a lie. There is no schism. All these things are based on a lie. And in answer to the schism of Archbishop Lefebvre, we are creating a Church of God commission. Ecclesia Dei means the Church of God, right? And they're going to create the first approved organization called the Fraternity of St. Peter. And they really should be called the Fraternity of St. John Paul II. Because the reason why the fraternity exists is only to show their loyalty to John Paul II. And that's why they chose the name of St. Peter. Because you have to choose the name of a saint, not anymore, but you have to choose the name of a saint, they didn't call it the Fraternity of John Paul II. Well, the 16 priests that left the Society of St. Pius X, right, those 16 priests in 1988 to form the Fraternity of St. Peter, because Archbishop Lefebvre consecrated bishops without the permission of Rome, right? That when he consecrated the bishop without the permission of Rome, that the Ecclesia Dei permission was put together to say you can now have your Latin Mass, but without excommunication, without disobedience. And you have your Latin Mass on the condition that you accept the new Mass and Vatican II, and those conditions have never changed. Furthermore, it was called an indult from the very beginning. The indult. An indult is an allowance of something against the law in order to prevent a greater evil. So an indult is an allowance of something against the law. The law remains. The law, according to Vatican II, is new Mass is illegal. And the truth is against the law of the Church. However, we're going to tolerate the new Mass and in indult format to tolerate something illegal temporarily in order to get the people back in line. So indults are a part of any legal organization. There will be indults in just about any organization, that you will make a law that says thou shalt not litter, and if you litter, you're going to have to pay a $1,000 fine. But it turns out you're in India, and all India is basically a littered place, so you make an indult that says for the next 200 years you don't have to pay the fine. And so the law still remains, while because of the situation, you say, okay, we're not going to make you pay the fine, and we're going to allow you to litter, right? The law stands in place. That's what indult is. That indult still stands in 2022. It has never been lifted. It has never been changed. They changed the use of a word, but they never changed the reality. And then, so that now we say that we can have a Latin Mass, we can have your tradition. Now you can say Mass in a church. And then now you can say Mass with approval. But in 84, the Mass was, you can have Mass, but you cannot have baptisms. You can't have traditional confirmations. You can't have traditional marriages. But you can have a traditional Mass, cannot be on Sunday, cannot be in a parish church. The restrictions of the 84 indult are far more than the restrictions of Pope Francis's renewal of that indult on Traditionis Custodes. Traditionis Custodes is a far less strict document than John Paul II's original 84 indult. But it's just simply a continuation of it. So what happens during this period? Two things happen. I wanted to draw a drawing of it, but let me see if I can. Let's try this. Do my drawing technique here. This is the blackboard thing for a board. Let's see this. This is the first time. I don't know if this is going to work. But anyway, two things happen, right? Let's see. Oh, that's a text. And doink. Who does this demonic stuff? Bang. Or it should be a thickness thing. There we are. So you've got your whole movement here, and now you got tradition. And tradition is going to branch off in two different directions, right? That's an arrow, okay? Okay, and then it's going to go that way, okay? That's the bad guys, okay? Sheesh. Another arrow, okay? Okay, so that from 88, there's going to be two movements, right? And so the one movement is going to be the continuation of tradition. So we know that's going to continue, right? And in the continuation of tradition, there's going to be Archbishop Lefebvre, traditional priests that are still so-called independent priests. To put exactly what's an independent priest, there's no such thing as independent priest. The term for independent priest in Latin is, how do you do the size on this thing? Where is the font size? Okay, there we are. Doink, 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 doink. He is a vagus. Are you a vagus, Father? Yes. There we are. Let's make it bigger. Vagus. Okay. So the independent priest is called a vagus. Okay. Means a vagrant. And a vagus is a priest or a monk or a nun. That's a vaga. Okay. A priest or a monk who doesn't have a superior, doesn't belong to an organization. We can understand that Father Hannafin, who was called an independent priest here in Boston, Kentucky, he was not a vagus, right? Not a vagus. He was a priest ordained in 1945. And they called him Grandpa when he was ordained because he was 33 years old. He was older than most of the professors. And when he was ordained in 1945, he was ordained a priest of the Diocese of Louisville, Kentucky. He was a diocesan priest until he died. He never abandoned his post. He never abandoned his responsibilities. Therefore, he never became a vagus. And he remained a priest of the diocese. He died in the diocese in 2001 at the age of 87. He was our priest here from 1973 until he died in 2001. And Father Urban Snyder was not a vagus either. He is a Trappist monk from Kentucky, and he was in the monastery just down the road, Gethsemane Monastery. And he was exclaustrated in 1962. It's a complicated word. It means that you're legally outside the cloister of the monastery. And he was functioning as a parish priest, even though he wasn't. Like, for instance, he didn't wear his habit. He wore like a normal clerical attire. He was exclaustrated. And so, but nonetheless, Father Urban was not a vagus. He was a Trappist monk. And furthermore, he's one of only 2 priests in the whole world who were approved by Rome to join the Society of St. Pius X. In 1972, Pope Paul VI gave official approval because there had to be an indult from Rome because Father Urban Snyder is a Trappist monk. The Society of St. Pius X is an organization of common life. And there's a law in the church that you can go from a lower life to a higher one, but you can't go from higher to lower. He was in a higher life of a monk going to the lower life of a religious of the Society of St. Pius X. He had to get a dispensation from Pope Paul VI, which he got in 1972, and he had to get special approval, and he was incarnated by Rome into the Society of St. Pius X as an official member of the SSPX in 1972. Later on, there was a French priest that the same thing was done to, but I don't know his name. Father Urban lived here, so I know him. And Father Urban Snyder was approved by Rome, showing that Rome accepted the SSPX as a legitimate order in the church to go through the process of a dispensation of a monk being released of his promises and vows to his abbot, to be made an inferior to Monsignor Marcel Lefebvre, the superior of the Society of St. Pius X in 1972. He remained, in 1976, he was then brought back into the Trappist monastery in Genesee, New York. Not here in Kentucky, but in Genesee, New York. And so then he went back to being a Trappist legally. But for 4 years, he was legally, by Rome, a member of the Society of St. Pius X, and he's one of our canonical proofs that Rome accepted us as a real legitimate order to go through all that trouble. He's not a vagus when he stood for tradition. The same is true of all the priests of tradition, that they belong to an order or they belong to a diocese, and then because of the heresies and errors of Vatican II, they had to exit the diocese and exit the order in order to maintain the faith. In fact, they didn't exit the order. They remained faithful, and the order left them. Father Urban Snyder used to always give the example. Remember when I was a little boy, Father Urban was here, and he says, you know, it's a bit like the old couple. The example he used to always give. He says there was an old couple, and they were driving in their pickup truck, an old Kentucky couple, and they were driving across the roads, and the grandma was on the right side leaning against the door, and grandpa was riding. He said, you know, Harold, when we were newly married, I used to be sitting right next to you, and you used to be sitting right next to me. Now you're way over there, and I'm way over here. What happened?" And he said, "I haven't moved." So Father Urban Snyder used to give that example all the time. He says, "Yeah, she got distant, but he's in the same spot, so don't blame him." And very often, when people are distant, how do we get far apart? Yeah, you left. That's how we got far apart. How do we get back together? Come back. And so that's the example Father Urban used to use all the time when I was a kid. You know, that what happened at Vatican II. We just kept on going. And then they left. They said, "How did you get so far from us?" "I don't know. We didn't move." "How did we get back together?" "Come back." And then he would add, "Furthermore, what happens if Harold changes his mind?" "Okay, dear, I'm coming over to you." If Harold changes his mind, you're going to have an accident. And you're going to have 2 dead people. So he's got to keep on driving until she decides to change her mind. And that's the situation in the church in which we are right now. We have to keep on driving, keep on going the same way, and let them change their mind. So the one movement continues, right? But then there comes another movement, and this is to create a split in tradition. And this was a deliberate plan. And the key to the plan was to make tradition identical to Latin Mass. That's why there was a waiting of 18 years between 1970 and 88. Because I remember when I was a little kid, all the priests I knew, almost all of them, they all knew how to say the Latin Mass. They'd only been saying the new Mass for a few years. All of them remember the Latin Mass. All of them were deciding, should I go back to it? Should I not go back to it? But now, when you come forward 18 years, now the new Mass becomes a part of people's lives. And furthermore, the Latin Mass becomes a banner. Because the Mass was not intended to be our banner. Our banner is the faith. Remember, there have been many splits in the church in the last 2,000 years. The Arians broke away. And it's interesting about the Arian crisis. That's a very good example because the Arians priests and the Arian bishops did not believe that Jesus Christ is God. They firmly believed that he was only an ordinary man. They never changed their Mass. If you went to an Arian Mass, he said, "Hoc est enim corpus meum," in his Mass. And he said, "Hic est calis sanguinis mei," etc., in his Mass. He said exactly the same Mass that we said this morning. The Arian did not believe that God was in the host. And yet, not one saint, you cannot find St. Athanasius, nor any St. Hilary, or any saint of that period say, don't go to Arian Masses because they're not valid. Try to find a document like that. Doesn't exist. Try to find a sermon like that. Doesn't exist. They didn't say, don't go to their Masses because you don't know if he's present because you don't even know if the priest really believes. They do know the priest does not believe. They know with certainty the Arian priest does not believe that God is in the host. But they did say, stay away from the Arian Masses because they're heretics. That they said. That's why St. Athanasius has his famous quote, they have the churches, but we have the faith. Both of them had the Latin Mass. There was no new Mass. So the devil did not want to repeat any mistake of the Arian crisis. He wanted to change the banner because we've got to remember, what's the purpose of this battle of the last 50 years? This battle is not to end the Latin Mass. The battle is to create a united church. The devil wants to create a united church. And this united church that he wants to create, right? This united church is going to be a church of conservatives. It's not going to be a church of liberals. So remember the goal. We always say to the seminarians, that omnibus respice finem. In all things, look to the end. And don't forget the end, right? So we can write it here. Since we're into Latin these days, my blackboard, I guess. Whatever, communist. Just don't be a vagus. Okay? In omnibus respice finem. Right? Uh-oh, we went over there, right? Oh, whatever. All right. In omnibus respice finem. All things look to the end, right? In all things look to the end, right? In everything look to the end. Don't forget where you're going. And what is the finem of what the devil is doing? So we're not fighting against abortion. We're not fighting against the new mass. We're not fighting against Hillary. What happens is we're choosing little things to fight against. And that's what you do when you're fighting a war. What they're doing is they got a helmet. You're in the trenches. You got a stick. You got a helmet. You stick your helmet up so they can shoot at the helmet. Then you put your head up over there to get a look. And hopefully they shoot at the helmet. But the fact is, we don't care about the helmet. We're going for the brains. Right between the eyes to hit the vacuum that's behind it. So the fact is that we have to remember, in all things consider the end. There's a final end, which is God. There's a final end for the Satanists, which is the kingdom of the Antichrist. But then there's intermediary ends, stepping stones that get you where you're going. And one of them is the split of 88. Preparation for many more splits. We're experiencing many of them right now in 2022. So the split of 88. Now these guys are approved. They're going along with the whole approval of Rome. All they had to do was accept the new mass is okay. You don't have to celebrate it, but they changed their minds, didn't they? They changed their minds. In 1999, Rome wrote to the Fraternity of St. Peter. They fired Father Bizik, who was superior of the Fraternity of St. Peter at the time, got rid of him illegally, and he accepted it, which he should never have done. Put in Father Arnaud de Villiers, who was my spiritual director once upon a time, a French priest. Put in Father Arnaud de Villiers as the superior. He was a complete liberal. And they threw him in, smashed Father Bizik. They then said that all the priests of the Fraternity of St. Peter must have a representative or each individually concelebrate the new Mass with the bishop of the diocese on Holy Thursday when blessing the holy oils. And that every priest who says the Latin Mass does not need to ask any permission to celebrate the new Mass. There was no new revelation in there at all. That was already contained in 88. It's just that they told us that'll never happen. Well, in 1999, 11 years later, it was just put in writing what was already the case. There were 16 Fraternity of St. Peter priests, the same number of priests that left us in 1988. 16 priests left us in 88. In 1999, 16 French priests disobeyed Father Bizik and all celebrated the new Mass. 16 French priests. The remainder of the Fraternity of St. Peter, especially in America, became very upset about it. And Father Bizik became upset about it. The American priests appealed to Rome and said that we are the Fraternity of St. Peter and we are allowed by indult to say the Mass in Latin, and therefore we should never have the new Mass in our order. Rome rolled back and said, you're right. Indult. which means you don't have to have permission to say the new Mass. Anybody can say it, and Father Bizik can do nothing about it. And by the way, Father Bizik, you're fired. And they threw him out. So he was superior. He was supposed to be superior for 12 years. He was superior for 11 years. And then they threw him out. And then they put in a new superior, Father Ono de Villiers. And he was the founder of the Fraternity of St. Peter who was thrown out. So this movement continues. Now they can say Mass in the churches, whereas we have Mass in people's houses. We got Mass in the little barns that we turn into churches. We got Mass in all kinds of places, factories, etc. But they can have Mass in all the approved churches. Now the indult begins to slowly develop. With it, Novus Ordo people come, and a prophecy of Archbishop Lefebvre is fulfilled. In 1988, Archbishop Lefebvre said, if I go along with the approval of Rome, and if we are approved and we continue working alongside the Novus Ordo priests, we might grow. We might get people, more people coming to our Masses, but they're going to be the wrong people. Because they will only come for the Mass, and they will not come for the faith, and there will become a division of faith amongst our people. We are going to have a total variety of beliefs of faith, and we will be torn apart and become terribly disunited because we will no longer be standing for the faith. That's what happened to the Fraternity of St. Peter. They were in the whole indult movement. I've now met priests in the indult movement because one of my duties before I was expelled in 2012 was to meet priests in the Novus Ordo and to help them come to tradition. I met over 300 priests. And also to meet bishops. I met over 30 bishops. So I met over 30 bishops and over 300 priests and talked to them about the Latin Mass. Many of those priests I met already said the Latin Mass. I remember one priest in the Philippines who was 85 years old or so at St. Teresa's Church across from the airport, Terminal 3 in Manila. He said the Latin Mass over there, huge church. And he said that, I said, you say the Latin Mass? He says, yeah, I hate it. I can't stand it. I despise it. He said, well, why do you celebrate it? Well, I celebrated it when I was ordained. I didn't like it then either. I said, well, then why did you get ordained? And he said, well, Bishop told me they need somebody to say the Latin Mass. And I say it. By the way, the people that come here, they're the reason why I hate it. They're disgusting. That was one priest. Another priest I met did not believe in the real. Two other priests I met did not believe in the real presence. Both of them, when I talked to them, I thought they were very conservative priests. We talked for a long time. And then I found out they didn't believe that Jesus Christ is in the Blessed Sacrament. So when you met them, wearing their full cassocks with all the nice buttons and everything, they say a beautiful Latin liturgy, but they don't believe in the real presence. And others I met say the Latin Mass because they like it, they think it's nice, but they don't believe that it's better than the new Mass. And others think it's better than the new Mass. And many of them hate the new Mass, but they feel like they have to be obedient. Many of them accept Vatican II 100%. Many of them hate Vatican II, but they all have a little different belief between each one of them. They're not united. I've met many of the faithful that go to the new Masses, these Masses. Some of them go because it's a 10 o'clock Mass. And they go to the 10 o'clock Mass, but they hate the new Mass. They hate the Latin Mass. But it's a 10 o'clock Mass, so they go. And so you have a great variety. You have ones that go because they like the priest supports NFP. Others that go for every level of in between. But they don't go for the faith, they go for the Mass. They go for the Mass. And it's like one psychiatrist was telling me, he says, you know, that they say people are friends. Well, people are rarely friends. You normally have, for instance, drinking buddies. What's a drinking buddy? That's a buddy of drink. Your drinking buddies are your drinking buddies as long as there's beer. Then you're buddies. When there's no more beer, you're no more buddies. Your basketball buddies, they're your buddies when you play basketball. When they can't play basketball anymore, they're not your buddy anymore. Like I remember in the seminary, we were playing basketball, and one guy destroyed his ankle and was laying on the floor, laying on the court, and we still had 5 minutes of recreation yet. We said, "Are you going to play or not?" He said, "I better get off the court." So he rolled off the court, and we kept playing. And then the bell rang. "How you doing, man? I really hope you're okay." Very concerned seminarians. But until that bell rang, get off the stinking court. Because we're buddies of basketball. We're not buddies of each other. You're buddies of drink. You're not buddies of each other. And that's the nature of every union, including the union of faith. We are united in Mass. That means you're united for 30 minutes at a low Mass. You're united for 3 hours if it's a big, long ceremony. You're united for an hour and a half if it's a high Mass. Outside of that time, you're not united because you're not at Mass. But if we have a union of faith, the faith is there in the Mass, which is why you can't go to the new Mass, because the new Mass doesn't have the faith in it. But you're also united outside of Mass because the faith is supposed to be in your basketball. And the faith is supposed to be in your breakfast. And the faith is supposed to be in your work. Your faith is to be in all things. Hence, the only way to have a bond that is stable is to have a union of faith or ideas. And the devil recognizes that a lot better than we do. So he switched the source of unity to a unity of faith, to a unity of religious services. Now, here comes and of approval ratings, right? So that now as it continues, now there's got to be more splits. There's going to be more splits. So we come forward now to 88. 88 to 2000 is a great period of growth for the Society of St. Pius X and for tradition in general, the independent chapels and so on. And that there was a growth. It was a period of development for the Fraternity of St. Peter and the Indult. In the beginning, they only set up their chapels wherever we are. So wherever the SSPX is, there's the Indult Chapel. I remember in Syracuse, the bishop gave the church right across the street. My brother was a pastor there. So the Indult Chapel was the same distance as this shed and the chapel on the top of the hill. They put their Mass schedule at the same time. So after Mass, people come down the steps and start arguing across the street. So they put the Indult Chapel exactly next to ours. And Our Lady of Sorrows in Phoenix, where I was a pastor for 10 years. I was there for 10 years, almost 10 years, a pastor for 5 years. And when I was there, at Our Lady of Sorrows, they put the Indult 5 minutes from us. Phoenix is the largest city in the United States of America in area. The largest city. From one diagonal to the other is basically 100 miles. But they happened to find a place about a half a mile from us. We're at 7th Street and Baseline, and the other church is at Central and Southern, which is just right across. And then the Fraternity of St. Peter was established in the same exact area. Phoenix is big, but they're located where we are. And this is what they did everywhere. Everywhere. There were a few exceptions. In Denver, Colorado, they built on the other side of town from us because they couldn't get a place next to us. They tried, but they didn't succeed. So they ended up being on the other side of town. But nonetheless, in most places, they built exactly where we are because the purpose was to pull people away from tradition. Then it takes on a life of its own as time progresses. 88, move forward until we come to the consecrated ecclesia day is created. Then we come forward, and then now comes the year 2000. And 2000 is a very important year. That's the year we went to Rome, right? This is the Rome Pilgrimage. I was supposed to be on it, and Father Tim was supposed to be on it too. About 5,000. All right. Let's do that. Close enough. I think there were about 5,000 SSPXers. Visit the Roman churches, right? Basilicas with permission. First time of JP2. All right. And by the way, one of our brothers, we have Brother Smokes, and he said he doesn't like in Winona when I was there, and he said that he didn't like any of that post-Vatican II rock. Only pre-Vatican II rock by JP2 and the Schismatics. So he believed in the group called JP2 and the Schismatics, and their favorite song was "Breaking Up is Hard to Do." So it's "Breaking Up is Hard to Do" by JP2 and the Schismatics. But in any case, so Brother Smokes, he died now, and Brother Smokes because he smokes cigarettes all the time, and in between hot temper flashes, but in any case, the pilgrimage of 2000 was important, and it was a litmus test year. I was supposed to be there. My brother was supposed to be there. There were going to be 10 of us priests from the United States, and there were probably going to be 1,000 of us, but it ended up being, I think, only about 5,000 came at that time. And then John Paul II approved, and we went to the 7 basilicas. We're not allowed to celebrate Mass, but we were allowed to use their sound system. We were allowed to pray publicly in the church, and a Roman cardinal traveled with our priests for the first time in an approved meeting inside of the churches. Most of us priests said Mass in these churches many times. Every time, 100% illegal. Father Hugo was the master of it. You go in, step over the rail, rip the cord, and say the Mass, and somebody better not try to interfere. All the time, right? And we said Masses many times, many priests said Mass at the tomb of St. Pius X, in the back of St. Peter's, because we always have our Mass kit, set it up. By the time they send the complainers in the sacristy, by the time they come out, by the time they try to figure out what to do, we're gone. So, but this is the very first time where we had everything with approval. Then there was a meeting with the Cardinal Ratzinger and Cardinal Hoyos, I believe, at that time. Might have been before Cardinal Hoyos, but Cardinal Ratzinger and I think Cardinal Hoyos. And about we got to get the Romans and the SSPXers together. And we're going to change the way we are approaching Vatican II. But remember, this is all part of the next stage of the development of the battle. Because the next thing that has to happen is, in every kind of battle, so we pulled these guys apart. So now, you go a little bit further, and then, bam, grab the next group off, right? Next one apart. You continue on a little further, break the next ones off, right? So your main line's getting thinner and thinner and thinner, right? So that, and now the next stage of the breakaway, we're going to change the Society of St. Pius X, and we're going to have them join the other guys. When we were betrayed, and Archbishop Lefebvre was betrayed, and Catholic tradition was betrayed in 1988 by the whole indult movement, we considered them enemies. But as time progressed, they're not enemies anymore. So if you go back to the, let me see the remote thing. No, the other one. You go back to the age of, you can kill that guy for 2 seconds. You see here back in the 5th age, the time of the great wars, right? The Protestant and Catholic wars. Remember how Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. The Catholics hate the Protestants because they raped their nuns, killed their priests, took their churches, left the faith. And there's religious wars. Religious wars, and you're trying to keep the faith. After 100 years of religious wars, the children arose up. Why are we fighting each other? You believe in Jesus, we believe in Jesus. Why can't we just get together? Let's stop killing each other. Phase 1. So we get to the 1700s, or what was the diet of hats? 16, oh my goodness, the diet of worms. Is that the one? Oh, forgetting my history. Sometime in the past in Germany, there was a meeting and a powwow. And so I think it was worms. And what do you call it? And they decided to stop the religious wars. Protestants are still Protestants. Catholics are still Catholics. But let's stop killing each other. Phase 1. Now we're coming forward to the year 2000, and it's just like the diet of worms. Fraternity of St. Peter is still Fraternity of St. Peter. SSPX is still SSPX. They betrayed us, but let bygones be bygones. Let's stop killing each other. Let's stop fighting. That's the stage. Now, then you continue forward, just like they did a few hundred years ago, until eventually the Protestants and Catholics are going to work together, right, to fight against Hillary, to fight against liberalism. And what is the purpose of this? It's taking these religions. In the old days, if you're a Methodist, you hated Presbyterians. And if you're any kind of Protestant, you hated all the other Protestants, but you despise more than Satan the Catholics. As time is progressing, the Protestants stop hating one another. Then the Catholics stop hating the Protestants, and the Protestants stop hating the Catholics, and they all become one. Pope John Paul II wrote an encyclical about it, Ut unum sint, that they may be one. Now it's also true, St. Pius X wrote about the same thing, may we all be one. Leo XIII wrote the same thing, may we all be one. But Leo XIII and Pius X pointed out, we want all the people of the world to become one. But the only way we can become one is if we're united in Jesus Christ. And the only way to be united in Christ is to be united in his mystical body, which is our Holy Mother, the Church. And the only way to be united in that mystical body is to be united in the faith under the Holy Father. We want unity. Leo XIII wrote that to the Anglicans. Pius X wrote it also. Many other popes wrote the same thing. However, when Vatican II comes, we have a change. Let's get together and search out our common ground. And this is what is done in all pagan unions. It's a hallmark of all pagan unions to compromise and seek common ground. So now that's beginning to happen in tradition. The year 2000 was a very important year for the Society of St. Pius X, because it was, and the Catholic tradition in general, and the Fraternity of St. Peter, because it was the beginning of let's stop hating each other like we used to. Just like a few hundred years ago, right? Let's stop that, you know. And so the, 1 second here, take a break in a few minutes here. So let's stop hating each other like we used to, right? And, you know, and so the breakaway, the next stage of the breakaway continues in the year 2000. I remember Father Schmidberger visiting the seminary in Winona where we had our priest meeting, and he was sitting there at the table. He was sitting down to the conference, and he was sitting there giving the conference, and I always sit in the back, because I always used to sit in the back of the bus with the, you know, I never sat in the front with the good kids. So, and there were about 30, it might be 30 or 40 priests there. maybe about 30 priests. And so he was sitting there in the front, and he was saying, I met with, he was at that meeting with Cardinal Hoyos and Cardinal Ratzinger in the year 2000. He came to the February priest meeting, and we were focused on the hockey game and the basketball game. And of course, we have a priest against seminarians hockey game and priest against seminarian basketball game. I don't care about the hockey game. And, and so we're focusing on those things, and he's giving a conference, and everybody's sleeping, like you're always supposed to do during a conference. And then at the conference in the afternoon, of course, and he's giving the conference, and he says, Father Schmidt says, yes, I met with Cardinal Hoyos, and he said that we want you, the SSPX, to come back into the church. And people started, kind of half waking up. And we want you to help clean the church, clean the toilets of the church. And then he said, and Father Turker said, I'm ready. And he pulled up his sleeves and said, I'm ready to help clean the toilets of the church. And then it says, so we're going to make it back in with Rome. And all these sleeping priests, it was interesting because I was in the back, and at the time I wasn't opposed to the idea at all. I was just sitting in the back watching, and most of the priests were sitting forward. And when he said, we're going to go back with Rome and clean the toilets of the church, all the priests went, like simultaneously, 30 priests, they all woke up. I mean, there was guys snoring, guys like this, and and then they woke up, and we all did it so suddenly, nobody thought about it. And Father Schmidberger was sitting in his chair, and he went backwards. He jumped back, and he said, I'm not going to compromise. I'm not going to compromise. I'm not going to compromise. And everybody woke up. That was the attitude in the year 2000, right? It turned out he made visits all over the world. He went to St. Mary's, Kansas. He went to our priest meeting. And when he was talking about, we got to make a deal with the Modernists, we got to not be so negative anymore, nobody was taking it. He went back to Rome and met with Cardinal Hoyos and gave the results of his world tour. And they developed a plan in 2002. We're going to have to slowly work on you SSPX guys. So what we're going to do is, first of all, you agree to have less negative commentaries against Rome, against the new Mass, and we agree to have less negative commentaries about the SSPX. We're going to slow down on the SSPX excommunicated rhetoric, SSPX bad rhetoric. Then we'll meet again, and we're going to have doctrinal talks and discussions. Then we'll have more events where you're going to be approved. I was the next approved event, which was in 2008. I was part of the Indian delegation. 2008, we went to Lourdes. We had 25,000 people. That's where I discovered that French drunks speak perfect English. For some reason, I always attract the same people everywhere in the world. No matter where I go, it's always the beggars, always the street people. So 2008, so I have a good conversation with some frogs that were drunk. Okay, this was the, what do you call it, Lourdes Pilgrimage, right? This time, we had 25,000 people there. And we had 70 people from India and the Philippines and Asia, but we had more banners than everybody else. And we had our white cassocks and everything. So we had our white cassocks and our banners, and it looked like there were about 1,000 of us. There was 70 of us. And then also Father Couture is really good at advertising. So we were inside that stupid, disgusting church in Lourdes. They have a little basement, underground bomb shelter with an altar in the middle of it. And we had 25,000 people there, and there was room for at least 10,000 more. The place is big. We didn't fill it with 25,000 people. So, but there was one spot because it's where it was really visible, and that's where we were. We were holding our banners. Vietnam, India, China, what do you call it? We had everything. Singapore, We had about one person from each country, but we had the banners. So we had the SSPX representation, and so I was part of that delegation. And there in 2008, Lourdes Pilgrimage, 25,000 people. And so now, and it was approved. This time we were allowed to say Mass. And but Bishop Flay couldn't celebrate the Mass. What did this time, it was that a priest celebrate the Mass. Bishop Flay can give the sermon, which he did. He gave the sermon in 5 languages. And he preached in German, then he preached in French, then he preached in English, then he preached in Spanish, and then what was the fifth? He preached in Italian, I think. So he just preached, he translated his own sermon, preached in 5 languages, you know, and then the Lourdes Pilgrimage. And now we had 5,000 in the year 2000. We had 25,000 in 2008. We had over, I remember the procession of the sisters and the priests, but nobody came from Macomb. We had one seminarian because it was during the summertime, and it would interfere with something called, I think it's called vacation. And so the frogs said, forget it. I believe in Jesus, but not in the summer. So they refused to come. So they had American seminarians over there. And it was really hilarious. We had Father the Man. Father Theman was a deacon at the time. We sent him to the seminary from the vocation retreat. And they had him read the epistle and the gospel in French. So you got 25,000 frogs standing out there. And you got an American seminarian turning around and reading the epistle in French. I mean, the most stupid thing in the world. And meanwhile, there's like 200 French priests out there. There was only a couple French seminarians, but there were at least 2 or 3 French seminarians there. But they had the American read it. And of course, they did the Latin Mass, but they did the readings, epistle and gospel, in French. So then they didn't do it, and it was a high Mass. So he was a deacon for the Mass, so he sung the gospel, and then he turned around and then did his murky buckets version of French. I don't think they understood one word. They probably understood the Latin better than they understood the French, but he had to do it in French. And I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. Like there's a few frogs out there, and so, but nonetheless, it was all part of the transition of faith to get us adjusted to, we can work within, we can be approved, right? And and so that continued there, and then they're preparing people for the great split, which would happen in 2012, and then then comes 2012. Can't see these numbers. There we are. We got it. We'll go ahead and close the prayer here. We're supposed to have a gap in between. And then we'll pick up with the 2012 because we've got to move forward with the rest of it here. Because you can see this. You see how it's the same lines. It's the same lines all the way through. Right? But let's go ahead and say a prayer here. And the cross is that way. So, in Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, amen. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost. St. Vincent and Ferrer, St. Jude, Lady of Victory, Lady of Sorrows, Lady of Christians, St. Ignatius, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, amen.